Our next item is under item number 14. It's an action item on R277-419 pupil accounting. Background on this, we'll turn time over to Deputy Superintendent Stallings.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just realized I need to share a different screen now. Just one moment. And I'll make sure that that is working. Looks like it's working fine. All right, board members, Deputy Superintendent of Policy, Angie Stallings again. New topic, R277-419 is the board rule that governs the minimum school days and instructional hours for our schools. You may remember many of the board members who were here last summer and fall that we, the board, amended R277-419 fairly significantly in July and August of last year. When the board determined and amended 419 at that time, they made it effective for 1 year only. So we are now getting ready for the 21-22 school year, as you know, and if the board takes no action, we would need to revert back to the version of 419 that was in effect prior to August of last year. So what was used in the 19-20 school year. So first I'm going to describe and just provide a reminder of what changed from the 19-20 school year version of 419 to what we have for this current year, which hopefully will inform your options or what you'd like to do for the 21-22 school year. So I'm displaying here just 4 categories of the significant changes in the versions of the rule from 1920 to 2021. So first, we changed the requirement for 990 of instruction to changing it to requiring LEAs to provide 900 hours, providing educational services for 990 hours. And while that sounds a little like a nuance without a difference, if you look at the definition of educational services, it's broader than just saying instructional hours. Second, this year's version of the rule does not include the daily hour minimum of 2 hours in kindergarten and 4 hours in grades 1 through 12. So previously, if the school was not meeting for at least those 2 or 4 hours, it could not count as a day for the 180. Third is it eliminated prescriptive language about what may or may not be counted as hours of instruction. So things like the former version of the rule said passing time in halls did not count, and lunch did not count, but recess did, kind of really getting into what does and doesn't count as part of the 990. So the board decided to remove that language and leave it more up to LEAs. Also, it changed the terminology of something called continuing enrollment to either attendance validated or learner validated enrollment measurements. And I'll be happy to discuss, well, the next slide describes those two things. It used to be, or that the default was that all students their enrollment was verified based on their attendance, and LEAs are required to do a daily attendance check if they are using an attendance validated program. The former language used to say traditional and non-traditional. Because blended online competency-based learning is no longer non-traditional, the language was changed to attendance validated and then learner validated, with the idea that programs like online learning programs, blended learning programs, and competency-based learning programs you can determine a student's enrollment in the LEA by looking at learner validated elements. Now, that requirement or the allowability for an LEA to use a learner validated measurement has actually existed in the rules since 2016, but the terminology of how we describe that changed this last year from non-traditional to learner validated programs. So I just wanted to clarify that LEAs have always, at least since 2016, been allowed to not necessarily rely on attendance checks or in-person attendance, but they could use things such as student performance on assessments, student submission of projects or assignments, time a student spends online or in a program, face-to-face, maybe interviews via Zoom, something like that, or check-ins, other ways other than the student being in attendance. Those have all existed as options for our LEAs since 2016. So for this next year, I'm happy to go into more background, but I hate to take the board's time if people don't have questions or want clarifications, but I'm also happy to go into depth or detail on versions drafts 2 and 3 of 419. So I'll pull up draft 3 in just a moment, because I think draft 3 helps you see the difference between 2 and 3, because draft 3 has both the red and blue and the purple and green. Draft 3, what the difference between the two is really just what's in purple and green. But option 1, and there may actually be more options than this. Did you want me to pause, Chair Huntsman?
Yeah, there's a quick hand up, and I don't want them to, if they're like me, they get ran over by their own train of thought if they have to hold their thought for a long period of time. So I like to turn the time. I think Board Member Lear has a question or comment.
And no, I'm sorry. I was just trying to get in front of the queue. I would never lose my train of thought. That would never, or run it over. So no, I'm just, when Angie's finished, I have a couple of questions. Thank you.
Okay, well, please continue.
Sorry.
No, great. So I've got 3 options for your consideration. Of course, there may be other options that we have not considered yet. The first option would be to take the 2021 version of 419 that we use this school year, but not add an additional waiver of the 990. So just for board members to refresh your memory, not only did we make all of the changes that I described in the prior slides, but the board allowed LEAs to receive a full waiver from the 990 hours of providing instructional services if they submitted a form that described their formative assessment practices, among other things. I believe we had, and I apologize, I should have looked at this before starting today's presentation, but somewhere between 90 and 110 of our LEAs who filed 990 hour form waivers. So, and I can explain why I don't think, as staff don't believe that waiver is needed, that LEAs now have the ability, and many of them have established learner validated program policies where they establish these different measurements for determining or demonstrating student enrollment outside of attendance checks. So that would be option 1. Option 2 would be to adopt a version of the 2021 version, but eliminate the references to the 990 hour requirement. And that's in draft 3. So option 1 is in draft 1. Option 1 is in draft 2, and option 2 is in draft 3. And then the last would be to return to the 1920 version with edits. I'll admit that I don't have that prepared, but based on today's discussion, if that's something the board wanted to do, we could bring it back next month. So I'm happy now to answer questions, and I'd also be happy to pull up draft 3 and go through the rule in more detail, however the board chair would, whatever the board chair would like me to do.
Okay. Board Member Lear.
Thank you. I think can you hear me? Yep.
Yes.
I only have one screen today, so it's confounding me. I had a couple of questions. Angie, on line 434, and these are not necessarily in order, I apologize. Line 434 in draft 3, I think I was looking at. It's the amended portion. Is that right?
Yes, sorry. I apologize. Let me pull that up and go ahead. Yes, you were speaking to draft 3. Could you tell me the line numbers again? And I will.
434, I think. It's the amended portion right around there.
Yes, great. Project
435. I think I'm in draft 3. I can't see a draft number unless yes, it is. I don't think we've said what we meant, and I think words matter. A student receiving instruction delivered in a homeschool course or by a private is not eligible to be claimed in LEA's membership and does not qualify for funding. I think we mean to be specific to the time that the students being homeschooled or in a private school, because otherwise this would disallow the very popular dual enrollment practice. Am I reading that wrong?
You are not reading that wrong, or I mean, the intent, I understand your intent, but I've actually created an amendment. It was like I was reading your mind, Board Member Lear, and I have an amendment that I hope will resolve your concern. Chair, I apologize, I didn't wait for you to give me.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Board Member Lear, I don't think you were the only one who made this or had this question. And so there are actually 2 amendments that are uploaded to Civic Clerk that staff, based on questions from board members, have added or recommend. One is, and oh, I see, I didn't show the second part. You can see the amendment here. My assumption, or the way I was reading it without the amendment, is that a private or homeschool student, once they are actually enrolled in dual enrollment for those 2 or 3 or 1 courses, they're actually public school students at that time. They're enrolled in both systems. But to clarify, you can see here that I would propose that we say, except as provided in subsection 10B, that language that's currently in blue would stand. But then this is what the new language would state here. It states subsection 10A does not apply to public school instruction provided by an LEA to a homeschool or private school student participating in dual enrollment as described in section 53G-6-702.
Thanks. That's what I thought you meant. I just wanted the rule to say what I think we all meant. I had one more, a similar question on line 218 of also draft 3, where it says, and I'm sorry these take a while, but I think that we want to mean what we say and say what we mean, just like Dr. Seuss. A student who is enrolled in a program is considered a member of a public school. And this is more of a question. So a student who's attending Rowland Hall, Judge Memorial, he's under the UHSAA rules, he's playing football, which is, I think, would be a program. He's then considered a member of a public school, and or maybe he's not. And what do we want to be the case?
Chair, may I try to?
Yeah. Deputy Superintendent Stalling.
And Board Member Lear, I'm not sure the intent behind this language here on lines 218 through 221, or actually all the way through 223. I think it's all discussing this. I don't know if Aaron Bruff or somebody else might help us understand what we're trying to state there, but I'm.
And if I'm sorry, Chair, if I can ask Angie, if I can interject, if what we mean is he's the student who's enrolled in football is somehow the school gets a partial WPU for that student, I think that's great if that's what is the outcome. If we mean he's now covered by any kind of risk management issue or insurance issue, that's great too. But I'm also a little concerned that a student who only plays football is a public school student. So I don't know how to interpret that. Sorry for the interjection. That gave Aaron a time to think about it.
And I don't know if Aaron's available, but Chair, I think I've read the language further, so I think I can provide a little bit more insight.
Okay.
I'd like to look to see if programs defined above, but it looks to me like this is, I don't think football would actually apply, because generally football is not a course. It's not, it's generally considered an extracurricular activity that you might have a strength training course, but that again wouldn't likely be a football course. So I think what this is trying to say is 2 things. One, when the student is enrolled in a course, that enrollment, number 1, would generate WPU. So if the home or private school student is in, or even a charter school student, say, that's enrolling in a co-curricular activity generally, or a course like strength training related to football, or maybe a band course, that student is part of the LEA for that course and generates funding. But it also states that the accountability related to that course is tied to the student and in that course. Now, this used to be more of an issue, or more important, back when RISE, when we had end of course level assessments. Under SAGE and under our Utah Aspire Plus, a lot of our courses, especially in the high schools where you're going to see this more often, are not end of course or end of level course tests. They're more general, like the ACT, where you can't attribute them to, say, secondary math 1. And I could also use an assist from Assistant Superintendent Nielsen here if I'm saying anything incorrectly. So I believe, as I'm looking at this language, it's really talking about making sure that when the student, let's say you had a private school student or a charter school student who's now enrolling in a course, and maybe they are taking calculus at their district of residence boundary school, but the rest of their courses they're at the charter school, to make sure that the student's performance is applied where the student took that course. I believe that's what it's getting at, and not necessarily just exclusive to private and homeschool students, but it could be when district students attending another district school or a charter school student is attending. So we've provided a lot more flexibility with dual and split enrollment these days.
And can I just offer a thought about that? I don't even know if it's a suggestion.
We're trying to answer questions here. We don't have a motion on the table, so go ahead, board member.
And I don't have a motion about this. I think this could use some clarity, could use some improvement, because I think that this puts schools in a position that if the student is then enrolled in the weightlifting class that all football players take, then the school gets to count him in enrollment. If he's not, somehow due to his situation, then the school shouldn't count him in enrollment because he's not in a course. And I think that we shouldn't, I'm not a fan of intent, not a fan of, well, of course you'd read it that way. So I wish that language could be improved, but I can't do it on the fly either. I have one more question, if that's okay, Chair.
No, we're gonna hold your questions here and we'll get some other board members. I know you've got a lot of questions. Aaron Bruff is ready to respond to one of your questions.
I think we answered that actually, but okay.
If it's okay, I will respond to the difference between the program and a school is if a student is in a program within a school, that program doesn't receive an additional accountability system because it's defined as a program. It would just all be encompassing within the school. I believe that is the intent of the language here, where it's distinguishing the difference between schools are the accountability entity. They're the ones who submit the information to the UTREX clearinghouse file. And if a student belongs to a program in a school, that program doesn't receive additional accountability designations or anything like that. Does that answer your question?
I think I'm okay with it as it was, but there's no accountability for a lot of courses, pottery, and all kinds of electives like that. So I feel like we should still improve that language to be expressly including activities and or courses that are, so the school does get some WPU money if a student takes a weightlifting class that goes along with the football program. I'm using air quotes. So it kind of helped Aaron, but that's all right. Just expressing an opinion.
Chair?
Yes, Angie.
I apologize. I can't, now that I'm screen sharing and I am not able to raise my hand, but I just want to bring to your attention, Board Member Lear, that program is actually defined in this rule, and it is much more narrow than football or extracurricular activities. It says, means a course of instruction within a school that is designed to accomplish a predetermined curricular objective or set of objectives. So that means to me, it's about the courses that are done right during the regular school day or curricular courses, not extracurricular.
Yeah, which would include a football weightlifting class
Correct, but not the football team
alone.
Yes, I agree with you.
I'll make sure I tell them to take weightlifting.
I have some hands raised. Vice Chair Belknap.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion, please, Chair. Would that be appropriate?
Yeah, we have something on the table to discuss.
Okay,
besides
I
all
would
the-
like to make a motion that we approve our 277-419 draft 3 with the number, is it number 2 amendment, Angie? Which one is it? Where's that amendment? I know you're talking, but we can't hear you.
Muted, Angie.
I apologize. You're correct. It was amendment number 2 that we discussed. We do have a request for 2 amendments at some point.
Okay, and the number 1 amendment as well? I read number 1 as well.
Yes.
Okay, so I would like to start again, that I would like to make a motion that we approve our 277-419 with both draft 3 with amendment 1 and amendment 2.
I'll second.
Second was Member Moss, was it? I wasn't looking at it.
Right.
Discussion to the motion. Or let's see, do you want to speak to the motion, Vice Chair Belknap? Sorry.
I'll hold for now. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, discussion to the motion. Board Member Lear.
Oh.
Board members,
I've spoken.
hang on one sec.
Come back to
Member,
me.
okay. Member Straight.
I appreciate the motion on the table because I'd like someone to answer this question. So I was reading the newspaper today about Jordan School District, and they did a survey, and they had 18,000 responses, and 2/3 of those who responded wanted to remain with the 4-day Monday through Thursday, with Friday being it's still instruction time, but they do it differently. And I don't understand everything about what Jordan does. So based on the motion on the floor, how would Jordan School District be affected if they chose to maintain their current plan? And maybe we don't know enough about what they do.
Chair, would you like me to answer that?
Deputy Superintendent Stalling.
Yes, thank you. So Board Member Straight, under both drafts 2 and 3, and actually even under the version of the rule that was in effect in 1920 school year, an LEA has the ability to have different instructional models or days. I would say, so I mean, there's not a requirement, except for now there is in code. Thanks to the legislature and SB 107 that passed this last session. And now an LEA, unless they're in a completely online school, they do need to provide at least 4 days of in-person instruction. So actually that legislation impacted our LEAs even more so than what our rule did. Because our rule currently, if Jordan School District wanted to, now I imagine this wouldn't be popular with their community, but they could be providing instruction 5 days a week virtually, or do something like what they're doing that 5th day every day of the week. Which is why you saw, for example, Salt Lake City School District chose to do that for purposes of mitigating COVID-19 within their schools. Now, our charter schools, there's a little different situation there because their charter agreements, there are additional charter agreement issues that might govern. But even if we maintain the 990 hours, many of our LEAs who asked for 990-hour waivers last year actually may not have needed them. And the reason I say this is because in addition to an attendance check, as I mentioned before, when students are there in person, you can validate they're there and take attendance. But if you have a blended learning, an online learning, something kind of like what Jordan is doing on their 5th day, it's similar to what our online programs do 100% of the time, especially our online charter schools. they need to establish a learner validated program policy. That program policy will delineate how they are measuring student enrollment and progress and engagement in those blended or online, virtual, or competency-based settings. And so actually, whether you pass draft 2 or draft 3, if Jordan School District's board wanted to continue the 4-in-1, for example, as one model or option, they could do that under draft 2 or draft 3. It does in some ways, though, the difference between draft 2 and draft 3 is we eliminate this idea of the hours, the 990 hours and counting hours. Instead, we focus on the providing instructional services for 180 days. What that looks like is going to be very different from district to district and charter school to charter school. So I don't know if that helps, but I would say that actually SB 107 impacts our LEAs and their delivery models more so than even either draft 2 or draft 3. But I will say the difference between our 1920 version and either draft 2 or draft 3 is we've eliminated this, the 2 hours. So the 2 hours minimum or 4 hours minimum, that was a big change that could have hampered Jordan School District or others, because now that 5th day, they would have needed to have their students there at least 2 hours or 4 hours in order for it to be counted as a day. When we removed that for the 2020-21 version, we freed up what that looks like. We also eliminated things like no passing time can count and lunch and whatever. So draft 2 and draft 3, again, are essentially what we've had this year without the waiver of the 990. And mostly in my, again, this is Angie's opinion, many of our LEAs who sought waivers of the 990 didn't need those legally. They just need it. Some of them didn't feel comfortable yet relying only on their learner validated program policies. And we're wondering how they demonstrate that to auditors, since so many have been used to relying on the attendance check. And I hope that clarification helps.
Thank you. I like the flexible accountability. There we go.
Okay. Board Member Hart.
I just want to clarify that this would keep the 180 and drop the requirement, 180 days, and drop the requirement permanently for the 990 hours. What would it do with the number of hours in a day? So that would revert that part of it?
No. So we have not put the minimum hour day in there. So again, that would be the 1920 version. For the 2021 school year version, all of that I showed on that slide was eliminated. Both drafts 2 and 3 would keep that out. We have not added any of that back in. The minimum school day of 2 hours for kindergarten, 4 hours for grades 1 through 12, the passing time, all of that. So I'm showing here on the screen now, you can see what that looks like. It would say, except as provided in these sections, an LEA shall provide educational services over a minimum of 180 school days each school year. And you can see we've taken out the conduct school for at least 990 hours.
Follow up, Chair. Follow up.
Yeah, follow up.
So I guess I'm clarifying myself further. It's late. We are still keeping things from last year. So last year's bill or last year's rules don't go away. They weren't 1-year rules. We switched, we took 1920 rules, we made them 2021 rules, and now we're looking to keep 2021 rules about things that, other things, not the 990, not the 180.
Yes.
Okay.
Chair, can I just clarify that?
Yes.
So the 2021 version of the rule is only valid for this year, according to the board's intent, right? They put something in there that said this rule is in effect only for the school year. So if we were to do nothing, legally, we'd need to revert back to 1920, the 1920 version. But the version that I've prepared for your consideration today starts with the 2021 school year as the base. So I did not start as the 2019-20 school year as the base.
And one of the
Excellent.
reasons,
Thank you.
if I might just add to this, one of the reasons this is before the board today is because we've been living with our 2021, I guess you'd call it changes, the limitations, but our LEAs right now, local boards and that are putting calendars together, they're putting plans together, they're using some of the they're positioning themselves with some of the ESSER 2 fund and that of what their education is going to look like, and also what it might change to because of maybe what happens with this pandemic, but they're trying to prepare for next year. The legislature has created flexibility on spending, and the question before us, are we going to have flexibility in our in this rule and with the requirement to accommodate them as they're going in for another year of might be quite a bit of unknowns. So that's why we didn't put this in committee. We brought this before you today. Hopefully to get something out. If it doesn't come out, then it will be another month, but our LEAs are curious on what rule they're going to have to follow as they're putting their calendars together. That a lot of them, as many of you know, they want to have them done by April, before April's out. So, board member Earl. Let's see. Yeah, board member Earl, your name.
Yeah, I have a couple of, well, one comment, but then a question. My comment is, even if schools cut their school day down, the accountability is still there, meaning that, and I think that was already mentioned, that they've still got to meet, the needs. But at the same time, this does allow that flexibility to really meet the most important needs and such. My question is this: what does learner validated enrollment status look like when we're talking data? Is it, what does it look like? Can anyone tell me?
I could answer that.
Okay, please do. Deputy Superintendent Stallings.
Great. And board member Earl is speaking to this amendment in Amendment 1, where we've asked LEAs to submit each student's attendance validated or learner validated enrollment status. And Aaron Bruff can correct me if I'm wrong, but it would be essentially a field in the system that says they're either being counted or their enrollment verification is being done either through an attendance validated or a learner validated. So it would be like essentially checking the box saying this, and the reason why that information will be requested is that if at some point the board wanted to look at, well, I think there's a couple of reasons, and Aaron can get into more of the details, but if at some point the board wanted to see how many of our students, for example, are participating in a learner validated program versus a traditional or, an attendance validated in-person program, you'd be able to see the numbers. Right now, we have no idea, for example, let's say that Aaron's son and my daughter are both, in Davis School District. One of them is attending full-time in person. The other one is 100% virtual. We have no indication when we look at data which type of program they're participating in. So that would give the board more information to see how students are receiving their instruction, whether it's in an attendance validated program or learner validated. So, and Chair, if you don't mind, I think Aaron Bruff might be able to add more.
Okay. Aaron Bruff, are you available?
Yes, yes, I'm here. And that's a wonderful question. It's at the basic, yes, exactly what, as Angie explained, it would be at least one field which would say learner validated or attendance. There's a possibility, we'll say probably a highly likely possibility there'd be another field saying if it's a learner validated filled, what type is it? Is it a hybrid? Is it 100% online? There's different models. So that hasn't been worked out yet exactly what it will look like, but more than likely it'll be 2 filled items that they would submit on every student.
Okay, so you're just talking a field that they check, we're either doing this, this, or this. It's not talking about submitting individual pieces of data to validate the program. Am I right in saying that?
Correct. That's
Okay,
my current
okay,
understanding.
that's where I wanted to know how much personal information would be collected there. Okay, thank you.
And one of the challenges, if I just might weigh in, I'm not staff, but is that validation's got to, there's also a push to have limited amount of information and inputs and validation on this. So part of this, these proposed rule changes is to have some level of accountability and good data for us as a board and others, but not intimidate the inputs with lots of information. So they're trying to minimize it, but yet still meet an expectation.
Okay, that's what I was asking. I wanted to make sure we weren't overdoing it. Thank you.
Yes. So sorry, staff, for letting me weigh in on that. I just know it from the conversations I've had. So thank you. Board Member Lear, and then Board Member Hart and Cannon, I've got you in the queue. Again, we do have a motion on the table, which is R277-419 draft 3, including amendments 1 and 2.
Thank you. I have a question and then a comment, sort of like Board Member Earl. I am an old school educator trying to drag myself into the new millennium, and so I admit this is a little hard for me. And I'm also have a little PTSD on behalf of Salt Lake District, where we were told by the legislature to give directives to LEAs. We did it, and then the legislature didn't like some of the directives or some of the responses of LEAs, and I am concerned this could have the same kind of repercussions, and I really objected to that as a fairness issue when the rules had been set. Speaking of rules from our previous discussion. Having said that, line 343, and kind of to that point, line 343, the learner validated enrollment measurement described in subsection 4B may include. So we're not giving LEAs any requirements for the validated enrollment measurement. The LEAs come up with their own. Whatever they come up with, that's great. The board has to approve it, local board control. I'm just concerned that the learner validated enrollment measurements may not meet everyone's expectations for accountability. And I mean the broader kind of accountability, not just education accountability or the tests. And I'm wondering if that was intentional, bringing me finally to my question. Can you respond to that, Deputy Stallings?
Yes, Chair, is that all right?
Please do.
Yes, it absolutely was intentional. The learner validated measurements for each school or district could vary, even programs. You might have one course that the learner validated enrollment measurements might be varied. So yes, there is an intent to allow LEAs that discretion to come up with their own policies. I will let you know, the board members who were here back in July and August will remember that our staff provided guidance on the learner validated program policies and provided some sample language and options for LEAs. We would resend that guidance out. We might update it a little bit now that COVID-19 is not as much of a factor. I mean, it still is, but not as much as it was in the fall. So we do have guidance to provide to our leaders in our schools to help inform those policies. I've seen some of the policies that LEAs have adopted, and I was very impressed. One LA district, for example, actually does essentially a learner validated program policy for all students. But when the student is attending in person, does an attendance check for those days. But at least once a week, if the student hasn't attended in person once a week, they look at all these other factors of the student's login time. Anyway, I don't want to bore you, but there are really great ways that districts and charters can establish a policy to really measure student engagement, regardless of whether they're in the class or not. It's a way to show true engagement by the student rather than while they were sitting in a seat. So we're assuming learning is happening. So yeah, it's really meant to be flexible for the LEAs.
A quick follow-up, Chair, please.
Yes.
I would be more a believer, Angie, except there's nothing on the back end of this. You anecdotally looked at a few of 160 policies, and I'm not trying to be discouraging or demeaning or critical, but that's what the staff has time for. And we don't know with any certainty what those look like. And worse, or more concerning still, is we don't know if LEAs did or followed through with their learner validated plans. And I think we'll do so even less going forward because we'll have more variations on the theme, and guidance is not the same as direction. Is not the same as requirements. So I just express my concern that we it calls for a lot of trust for LEAs, and I personally think I can go there, but I think that we may have some again going back to our buyer's remorse, and we may be having some legislative buyer's remorse at what we allow LEAs to provide. So that makes me concerned. I almost want a promise from someone that if we give them the flexibility everybody seems excited about, that will endure and that promise will last. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Board Member Hart.
Yeah, it's interesting that I follow Member Lear's comments. We use learner validated measures. Our school went through a long process of developing those. And now I'm concerned that those learner validated options would only be there for non-brick and mortar type programs. We saw better accountability on the parts of students when it wasn't the fact that they sat in that chair, but they actually had to produce something, and that made more sense to parents. It's best practices for assessment, and I just, is there a way that we could not delineate between butts and seats for brick and mortar and learner validated for other non-brick and mortar programs? In addition, we saw a couple of new bills talking about the automatic excusal of absences without verify doctor's notes. All a parent has to do is call in. Attendance, in-person attendance at school is really a half-dead notion, and we have to go in the direction of something else in order to get that accountability, that participation, and so this is very promising, but I'm afraid as a brick and mortar that it wouldn't be an option open to us. Am I misunderstanding that?
Sure.
Deputy Superintendent Collins.
Thank you. Apologize again. I can't lift my yellow hand. No, you, Board Member Hart, first of all, you could, your LEA has to determine or state we are 100% as a district a learner validated program. And just because I know about Canyon School District because I live within the boundaries and have kids attend, the current structure of what you're doing of Canyons is a learner validated program right now because
Yes.
and Jordan, when they have that fifth day, that whole district is learner validated. In fact, you don't have an attendance validated program at that
Right,
point.
but next year, if we go back Fridays, which we will, can we still maintain learner validated?
Yes, because what you would just state is that you are a learner validated program. It's not limited to, if let's say you had all of your elementary and middle schools that were 100% in person, and of course that's never going to happen likely for a district because all of our districts have online programs now or blended. But let's say you had a large portion of your student body who were 100% receiving instruction in person. You could still designate all of those students as being tracked or not tracked, but as a learner validated program.
Can we go to that part in the policy, in the draft?
Sure. And I'd really, so I see your point, and maybe that's what we need to clarify. So let's say an LEA shall use one of the following. Now, this might be helpful because if you look at the definition, it might actually seem more limiting than the definition of the programs is one thing. But here, if you start on line 327, an LEA shall use one of the following learner validated enrollment measurements. So for a student primarily enrolled in an attendance validated program, the LEA may not count the student if they have unexcused absences during all of the prior 10 days. And for a student enrolled in a learner validated program, the LEA shall adopt the policy document. So I think what you're in, and I apologize, I'm kind of processing this in your question while I'm reading. And so maybe what we say is an LEA may, even if they are primarily, the students are enrolled in an attendance validated program, that an LEA may choose to use a learner validated program measurement for all students. So I think that's what you're maybe asking for, is something explicit.
I'm looking at line 99.
Yeah. The definition of the programs. So
Of learner validated.
yeah, I see your point. Maybe what we need to do though is amend the lines that I stated, I was showing below, where it gives LEAs the authority explicit. I would argue you already have, they could do this, but I can see where it seems a little bit, I'm trying to find the language again, where we state that.
Or add a D where it says a district adopts a personalized learning in-person model, because this is really what it is, right? Personalized learning. So
that's one option. If you give me a minute, I might be able to think of which amendment would be best, either to change the learner validated program definition, or down here where it talks about what measurement the LEA uses. Maybe it needs to be there where it says notwithstanding, an attendance validated program could still use a learner validated enrollment measurement, which is what I think you're asking for. So I can do a little bit of drafting and see.
That would be a proposed amendment. So is that what Board Member Hart you're trying to do, is amend this, or are you just trying to solve a question?
well, I wanted an answer to the question, but I'm concerned that it would require an amendment.
Okay, so while you're, keep that thought, but can we go to other board members too to see what they have questions or concerns? And then if Board Member Hart, you want to make an amendment, then we'll call on it. I think that might be the best interest of the time, and then we've got a lot of hands raised still. Which leads us to be, if we're not going to get something out today, we're better off. Well, I made a bad choice, but we would have been better off putting this in a committee and pushing it into another board meeting, but we might be doing this again too in another board meeting. So I am trying to figure out what's best for where we're going, but we do have a motion on the table and maybe some proposed amendments. So Board Member Hart, if you want to keep that in mind, I want to go to Board Member Cannon for a question, comment, or a proposed amendment.
Yes, thank you. As I looked through this, I thought, well, I want to know the definition of a school day. And so I looked it up in the definitions and it said, it's a day when educational services are provided and as defined in Section 5. And I can't really find anything in Section 5 that further defines what a school day is. Am I not reading right, or is there something I'm missing? Can you help me with that?
Deputy Superintendent Stallings, is there a Section 5 that has that defined?
I think I looked at line 156, and then Section 5 starts on 229.
Yes, no, so previously, as I mentioned, the former version of the rule defined school days as at least 2 hours in kindergarten or 4 hours in grades 1 through 12. So here, this section is essentially talking about minimum school days in general. So I think it's really about this whole section and kind of the limitations or guidance on school days. So maybe you could help me, and I need to go look at the definition, what it states, or what question or clarity or requirements you would like to have.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to be clear, if we're doing away with the 990 hours, and you have eliminated the defining number of hours that equal a school day, that seems a little lenient to me in terms of accountability. And so I wanted to check on that and see if we had any better description of what we're expecting from our LEAs in terms of a school day. So yeah, you can see line 156 says school day means a day where an LEA provides educational services to students subject to the requirements described in that section 419-5. And then we have all the exceptions and so forth. So I guess that leads me to a further question how are we benefited by eliminating the 990 hours?
Deputy Superintendent Stallings.
Great, that's a good question, I think, for the group. I think Board Member Hart kind of described some of the maybe benefits of maybe looking more, instead of looking at time, and although it still says 180 days, but instead of thinking about that in terms of 2 hours or 4 hours or an amount of hours in the day, instead looking at student progress individually and looking at it in a more personalized way and basing that not on time, but instead on the student's engagement and progress. That is where, and again, any of the members of the superintendency or board members want to weigh in, but it's an opinion that often we rely on a student in attendance for a certain number of hours a day to assume that the student is making progress and in learning and engaging. And so it's kind of a way of removing that kind of safety net and feeling like that makes you ensures instruction is happening, and moving more towards something like what Board Member Hart stated is looking at the student progress, performance, et cetera. And some people, if you keep that 990 there, that's all they see. And they focus on that versus what Board Member Hart said they're doing at her school, where instead of relying on attendance and the person being in the classroom, they're looking at the student's progress, performance, their output.
Okay.
May I respond?
Well, one more response, and then the rest of the questions are going to be one specific question, and we'll get an answer, because I still have a ton of hands up. So yes, please respond.
Yes, so I think that's a nice idea. I think we're at a point in time where it might be okay to try that, but I don't know that I feel good about approving this rule to exist in infinity. If we do something like that, I would like to return and review this rule, look at what performance has been like, see if we can validate that removing the 990 hours has not been too lenient, that we're still seeing progress and that kids are getting that learning. I have to think that legislators and others want to know that what they're paying for in terms of giving us tax dollars to work with is really benefiting their student, and we're doing enough for the students to have them learn efficiently. Thank you.
Okay. Vice Chair Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I move that we amend the amended motion on the table to include line 632 to read, "This rule is effective for the 2021-2022 school year." And I'd like to speak to the amendment.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second, Board Member Cannon.
Okay, Vice Chair Davis to speak to the proposed amendment.
Sure, thanks. I think we are seeing that we are going to need some movement in this area. It's going to be coming. It's here on our doorstep. I don't know if everyone's comfortable going a permanent change at this point. To Board Member Cannon's point, the 990 hour removal could be, 5 days a week for 2 hours a day. And maybe that's fine. Maybe that would be fine for students. I'm just not sure that we know yet. The data that we have for 1 year of adding this flexibility is a little bit concerning so far, with the early learning losses and the 20% less credit recovery and out of credits attempted in our secondary schools. Now, maybe this is because we had a spring shutdown. Maybe this is because our first graders have been wearing masks and can't see to get phonics and phonetic sounds. It could be for those reasons. Maybe it's because kids have been in and out of quarantine, but we don't know. It could also be because attending school creates greater gains. We don't have the data right now to study the different models that were chosen and how those impacted student learning. But if we tried this for a year, we'd get rid of all that stuff. We've got people vaccinated. We're probably not going to have masks next year. We're not going to have kids in and out of quarantine with our test to stay options and such. So this would allow us to try it for 1 year and really take some data, and maybe some of those numbers start to change and we study disaggregated models and choices that LEAs make. And we are in a better place to say, God, this really makes sense long-term for us here in the state of Utah. And yes, we can come back and revisit this anytime we want to, it's true. But this would allow those that are feeling hesitant to know we are going to revisit this in a year with increased disaggregated data.
Okay, Deputy, let's see. Oh, Dr. Dixon, I saw your hand was raised, but in the queue I have Member Norton, Vice Chair Belknap, Member Straight, but now we have a proposed amendment. So if you're going to speak to the proposed amendment, keep your hand raised. Superintendent Dixon.
Thank you, Chair Huntsman. It's probably a punctuation mark to Board Member Davis, but I just am so proud of the board for leaning in on one of our goals, which is personalized competency-based learning. And that means looking at learning in a different way, as has already been stated. You know, I'm getting quoted often for a comment that I make once in a while about being stuck in the 3 Bs, and that we have formed some of our programming of education around bells, buses, and butt time or seat time to be more appropriate. And so it is, you know, an opportunity for our LEAs to look at what they've learned through the pandemic. They're learning many lessons. I love being with advisory groups to hear how they're finding new ways to personalize education for students and families. And so in thinking about that, it's messy work. And I feel your pressure of trying to make this big decision right now. So, you know, we've got time to gather the right kind of data and learn from LEA responses. So maybe the extension of this would alleviate the concerns of LEAs who are trying to figure out what the 180 looks like, and plus what the hours within that 180 in a more personalized approach. So an extension at least seems reasonable to meet the needs of LEAs. And I'm not telling you how to vote one way or the other, but just know that the messiness of personalized education it's a good place to spend time in, and it warrants a lot more conversation with the board about what that means in terms of our rules and policies to support one of your very important board goals.
Okay. Board Member Straight.
Yes, thank you. So I'd like to speak in favor of the amendment because it fits with our strategic plan. It fits with our personalized competency-based learning model. And I think it moves us forward, gives flexibility to our LEAs, and also gives us time to look at the information and data that's out there over the next year and revisit this.
Okay. Member Hanson. We have an amendment.
I had a request, just and maybe Darren Nielsen's the best to answer this, about where we are with data at this point, and then I'll speak in support of the motion. But could I ask someone from staff to let us know where we are with data, student engagement and student assessments?
Okay, who would? Superintendent, did you want to take that on, or is Darren Nielsen?
I think Superintendent Nielsen is ready to speak.
Okay, Superintendent Nielsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Board Member Hanson, I'll answer the questions broad enough that I'm not sure I'm going to be zeroed in, so you redirect me. This is a good information for all board members and the public that's listening today to understand. We're advancing this year with the administration of state assessments, and vast majority of our students so far during the early assessments that we've delivered on a statewide basis have participated. So we're optimistic that at the end of this school year, we'll have collected large amounts of student achievement data using the full variety of state assessments that are contained in board rule and in state statute. I think what your question is getting to, though, is do we have the ability to use those results and align those in a way that allows us to see the impacts of these various instructional modalities, whether it's through learner validated programs, or whether it's looking at remote learning, or whether it's looking at the various school schedules that we have. There are limitations in this rule. The amendment number 1 that Deputy Stallings showed, where we would require, this rule then would require LEAs to submit their data in a manner that would allow the Utah State Board of Education to decipher and to see which students are engaged in learner validated programs is a step forward and a necessary step for us to be able to eventually connect students involved in those programs with various student outcomes, whether it's grades, graduation rates, assessment results, course participation, any of those variables that we can look at for all of our students that we have. We are collecting at a school-wide basis school schedules We'll connect to our student achievement data at the end of this year, and Ruff and his team is working on that, and also to determine, again, at the school-wide level, not only their schedules, but the number of soft closures that they've had to go through, which will give us, we're calling that opportunity to learn data, and that will give us additional context at the end of the year. But if you were to ask us at this point, can we do one of two things? Can we identify students who are engaged in learner validated programs? At the State Board of Education, the answer to that is no, because our system has been set up to track attendance validated participation or enrollments. And then the obvious answer to the second question is, can we connect outcomes for students who are engaged in those various programs across the state? The answer to that is no, not at this time.
Did you have a follow-up?
No, I appreciate Superintendent Nelson, Deputy Superintendent Nelson anticipated, I think, where I wanted to go with the question. He's answered it very completely. Sounds like we just don't have a full picture at this stage. And I'll speak in favor of the amendment to, I think that we do need to give LEAs some flexibility, but we also, before we release all the restraints, I think we need to understand what LEAs are doing and what impact that's having on our kids' achievement, and how important some of these measures are, how directly they correlate to student achievement. So one more year of collecting data, I think, would be good for us, and then we can take maybe a more educated look at this and decide how we want to go forward.
Okay. Thank you. We're speaking to the proposed amendment. Board Member Hymas.
Yeah, thank you. I can support this amendment to the motion, but I do have concern about just 1 year, and maybe Board Member or Vice Chair Davis can speak to this. I have found that 1 year oftentimes is just not enough time. And many times when looking over data, of course, the more the merrier, right? The more data we can gather. So I wondered if we could, like I said, Vice Chair Davis could speak to the reasoning for 1 year, and if we could even push that into a couple years, especially coming out of the situation we're in. I don't know what kind of accurate data we're going to get over this next school year.
So I know you're asking a question of a board member on her proposed motion. Did you want to respond, Vice Chair Davis? I thought in your.
I will respond quickly. I actually agree with Board Member Hymas, and I would extend it to 2 years, but I don't think it'll get the votes. So I think we have to stick to 1 year, and then we look at our data. And if it's kind of on the cusp, then we come back and say, we're going to gather data for 1 more year. But I think there are enough people here today who really want to see some forward motion and could probably agree to come back and reassess for 1 year, but to push it for 2, I don't know. I agree with you, but I think I'm going to hold it at 1 and see if we can get the votes, and then reassess when we look at the data in a year. And if we have to push another year, we can.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'm not seeing any other hands on the proposed amendment to the motion, and so the proposed amendment, I'm still calling it. I'm calling it Amendment 1, but maybe we better call it Amendment 3 because we're not voting. The original motion actually has number 1 and 2 included in it, so it isn't really technically the third amendment to the motion, but we can call it Amendment 3. Board Member Davis's amendment, and hang on one sec. Superintendent, your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know that this is germane to Amendment 3, but you'll note Deputy Stallings adding a term in Amendment 4 that we can speak to in a minute, but there was a bill that just passed, HB 181, and we want to make sure we're in concert with that. So when we get to Amendment 4, I just want to put a pin in that. Deputy Stallings may need to speak to that, so there's clarity about why the addition of a term and maybe that D is redundant.
Okay. Okay, so board members, we're gonna vote on the proposed amendment that adds to line 66, line number 633 or 633, on the R277-419-15 effective date. This rule is effective for the 2021-22 school year. Board members, please vote at this time. The motion passes. I thought there was 3 no votes. Is that what you thought, Vice Chair?
Yes.
That was Member Klein, Member Earl, Member Belknap. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, the motion passes. So the amendment, the motion on the amendment passes. So now we have an amended motion. So now we're going to continue. I'm going to go back to the queue. Dr. Dixon, your hand's still raised. Did you have something else to add? All right. Okay.
Sorry,
Next,
I'm having mouse issues today. I've got a jumping mouse.
okay. Next in the queue is Member Norton.
I don't need to speak.
Okay. And then it was Vice Chair Belknap.
No, Chair.
Okay. Member Straight. And then,
No, my hands, I'm showing.
I know.
Oh,
okay. Well, it was, you had your hand up before this amendment. So I called out those that were in the queue because I wanted to go back. So I know that Member Hart wanted to be in the queue. Member Hart?
No, actually,
You have a proposed amendment?
no, I think a member of staff can speak to that. It's been deemed superfluous. Staff?
I don't have, well, the staff's not going to put a motion on the table, so.
No. Like they can explain why we don't need it.
Well,
Deputy Stallings?
well, we don't have a motion, so there's nothing to talk about. We have.
Okay. All right.
So,
No
okay.
problem.
All right. So I'm not seeing any other discussion to the proposed amended motion. So I'm going to go back to, well, I'm going to call on the amended motion on a vote. I think I am.
Chair, may I say something?
Yes.
Thank you. So I apologize. So Board Member Hart, we would actually really appreciate a motion for number 4, and it may be very subtle now, but we do need to add the word personalized to line 103. And that will then make it so that regardless of whether students away from the school, in the school, 100%, if the district or charter has a personalized competency-based learning program, which is what you were describing, it doesn't matter if the student's in person or not. But not only is this personalized important to address the issue you raised, but actually we had a bill pass this session, HB 181, and the new term, instead of saying competency-based learning, it's actually a personalized competency-based learning program. And so this would also fulfill the requirement that we would need to update this rule to meet the changes from HB 181.
So, Board Member Hart, your previous comments and questions, and that prompted this proposed amendment. So
I would like to make an amendment.
To amend that line 103. So.
Okay, so I'd like to propose, so go ahead and propose the amendment.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I'd like to propose that we amend line, do you want me to read it?
Yeah, so isn't it adding the line? Is it not?
Yeah.
103C.
Yeah, it's an amendment that adds C, a personalized comma. Wouldn't there be a comma there? Or no?
No.
Okay, personalized competency-based learning program.
Okay.
To Rule 277-419-15.
I'll second that.
And we have a motion and a second. Did you want to speak to your proposed amendment, Board Member Hart?
I think this aligns with the strategic plan. I'm aware of districts that are doing these types of things and have seen great success in accountability and increased engagement with students. I think that this is the direction that the legislature has also taken, and I think it deserves a place in this trial year.
Okay, thank you. So the proposed amendment is to add under C, which will show up as 103C, a personalized, competency-based learning program. Discussion to the proposed amendment. Seeing none, board members, please vote to the proposed amendment. The proposed motion, or the motion to amend passes unanimously. Okay, now what we have before the board is, I'll just state the motion now. It's, good grief, I've got to go back to the original. We modified it. Where's it at? We need our writers to bring back the original motion as amended. That's it. So I don't have to, I'm not required to say draft 3, amendment number 1 and 2, but just as amended as final on the final reading. Okay. All right. The motion before the board is that the board approve R277-419 draft 3 as amended on final reading. Lorraine, your hand's raised.
Oh, never mind.
Okay. I'm not seeing any further discussion, so we will vote. I will restate the motion that the board approve R277-419 draft 3 as amended on final reading. Board members, please vote. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you.